Hi, everybody. I'm Dan Wells. I write horror, science fiction, and fantasy, and I talk about games on the internet. Today, I want to talk about a game that is incredibly dear to my heart. I talk a lot on this channel about things that are my favorite. My favorite game system, my favorite, character class system. Yesterday, I talked about my favorite GM tool that I've seen show up in a toolkit. Today, I want to talk about what is maybe not my favorite game of all time, but without question, my favorite role playing setting of all time. And that is, as you can see in the graphic, Rifts. I have had Rifts. This is my incredibly beat up copy. You can see the paper coming off and the tag at the top. I bought this. This is a first edition that I purchased when it came out way back in 1980, whatever the crap it was, 1990. Um, the newest edition is actually this, Savage Worlds Rifts, and I will be going into this game in more detail later in the year. This is the same game, Rifts, that's been translated into a different gaming system. It uses Savage Worlds. If you want to play Rifts, this might be the one that I recommend that you play because the original Palladium game system is not stellar. But that said, that is the one that I'm going to be pitching to you today. This is the much nicer, much fancier, much bigger Ultimate Edition. And a lot of people bag on the Palladium game mechanics, and I think with good reason. It is a very old school game style. It's very straightforward simulationist. Like there's a lot of better game systems out there. The Savage Rifts system, this does play a little more smoothly. That said, I am a Palladium junkie and have been since junior high. It was actually Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles from Palladium that got me into RPGs in the first place. I never played D&D until college. And I own, and if I want to risk it, maybe I will risk it, but I film these things here in my office, which is also my game room. Whoa! And over there you can see those two bottom shelves? They're not entirely Palladium games, but they are primarily Palladium games, and of course my son's history and physics homework that's all over the floor. But this one shelf in particular right here, that is Rifts, end to end. I own, with no exaggeration, 80 to 90% of the Rifts books, of which there are dozens. Dozens of them. I have written about them extensively. In fact, if you go on Board Game Geek or Role Playing Geek, right? Actually, RPG Geek, you can find my massive article that I wrote about Rifts and what books to buy and how they all fit together and things like that. So anyway, sorry about this. Let's get this set up properly so that everyone is happy and everyone can see me. My point is, I love Rifts, and I have loved it forever, and I can talk about it forever, so this might be a long review. Anyway, the reason that I recommend this one above the other versions is, first of all, it's a much more complete, much more amazing, thorough, pretty, hardcover version of that original old Rifts core book. And also, second, and maybe more importantly, the thing that Rifts does better than any other game, in my opinion, is ideas. It is overflowing with ideas. All of those books that I showed you that are just source book after source book and world book after world book. I remember reading somewhere decades ago some RPG zine that somebody had put together, and they were giving like a the best of the best list. The game that's best at X and the game that's best at Y and that kind of thing. And Rifts was the one they said, this is the best game to steal ideas from. If you play Rifts, you're not playing it for the game system. You're playing it for the imagination and the storytelling and the incredible world building behind it. And if that's what you're in it for, then the game system almost doesn't matter. And a good game master can keep people interested and keep the game fun and fluid, even if you're in kind of a old, clunky, munchkin-friendly system. You just got to get the right players who are willing to play the game for fun instead of trying to min-max it, and there's a lot of incredible stuff you can do. So anyway, let's talk about the World of Rifts. The basic one-sentence pitch for Rifts is that Earth, in the future, has become a massive nexus of multi-dimensional energy. And so it is every genre of storytelling combined into one. It has horror and science fiction and fantasy and everything else all in one place, because the world has been kind of torn apart and then rebuilt with elements of innumerable different dimensions and worlds and planets coming through. I said that was a one-sentence pitch, and then it was the longest sentence that you've ever heard. Let's start at the beginning. So one of the basic premises of the Palladium multiverse, the Megaverse they call it, is that everyone has this kind of well of magic energy inside of them that they call potential psychic energy, or PPE. And they've got, for example, an urban fantasy game called Beyond the Supernatural. It's kind of urban fantasy / horror, and that goes a lot into this concept of potential psychic energy, and is in many ways the precursor to Rifts. The next step is that everyone has this kind of core of magic energy in them, and that is doubled at the point of death, which is what a lot of vampires are looking for. It's why a lot of supernatural creatures are trying to kill, is because they want all of that extra energy that suddenly is bursting out when something dies. It's a nice little bit of internal consistency to the world building. So what happens next? Oh, that also, by the way, explains why a lot of evil magic users and things will do things like blood sacrifice, because we need to cast this spell, we need a whole bunch of energy, we're going to double it by stabbing this victim, and so on and so on. Anyway, so then take that one step further and say that in a bright science fictional future of Earth, when we have robots and we have nanotech and we have cybernetics everywhere and we've got all these amazing technological inventions, but we're still humans and we're still fallible and faulty, and at some point somebody starts a war, limited nuclear exchange, that kills a lot of people, more people than have ever died all at once in the history of the world. And because all of those people die at exactly the same time, and because there's this massive burst of magic energy when their potential psychic energy is doubled, this is getting very into the weeds here, then there's this just enormous, unprecedented burst of magic energy that floods the planet, that breaks everything. The kind of very limited magical, lines of ley line energy and things like that were on Earth are just suddenly overwhelmed, and this metaphysical magic structure collapses and breaks, and all of these, just millions of dimensional doorways are suddenly thrown open. And Earth, which used to be fairly isolated and fairly mundane and non-magical, is now just bombarded with magic energy, with magic creatures, with stuff from all over the Megaverse, from every kind of world and dimension that you can imagine. And so that is the apocalypse that created Rift's Earth. And approximately, I want to say 200 years later, the survivors of that apocalypse and the new people that have come in from other places have managed to more or less stabilize themselves. And so the North America, which is where the story primarily takes place, is, dominated by two or three major political entities, one of which is the coalition states. They are the survivors of the old human world. They are a high-tech, anti-magic, Earth-first, humans-only, human supremacists in a way. Not in a way, very overtly. And they've got several, outposts and several massive cities. Here I can show you, there's some cool pictures of one of the cities here in the little PDF. My PDF does not have bookmarks in it, which is obnoxious. But here's, you can see a little bit of the double spread. This is one of the big ones, which is called Chi Town, or Chi Town. I always pronounced it Chi Town because of the ninjas and super spies. It's not actually Chicago, and they kind of make that clear. And so people who want to call it Chi Town, that's not what it is. Anyway, I'm not from back east, so I call it Chi Town, and you're just going to have to deal with that during the course of this review. They've got, this enormous, multi-story, massive armored city that is kind of the center of the coalition states, and then there's all these other things around, and they've got a lot of very high technology, a lot of cybernetics, a lot of here, let me find, I can find actually, there's color photos of, whoa, was that it? There we go. So this is a suit of armor. The coalition states leans pretty hard into the idea that they are the villains of the world, and so they've got, skulls on their helmets. Their soldiers are called Death Boys, or Dead Boys. Here's some of their other things. They employ these kind of mutant dogs that they have genetically engineered and then raised to be incredibly loyal soldiers. They've got massive robots. They've got these big, huge Death Head transports. Here's some more shots of Chi Town. And you can see kind of normal city and then this enormous armored, contained structure, almost like the a mega city from a Judge Dredd kind of idea. Oh, and you can see all in one shot, that two-part thing that I was showing you before. So anyway, that's the coalition states. They've got some really intriguing stuff going on. But then there are other political entities, because the world is too chaotic and too full of potential for anyone to just leave it, because that magic energy that flooded in, the chaos of it appearing, destroyed everything and uprooted and upheavaled everything. But it's still there, and Earth is kind of the center, the major bus station, so to speak, for the Megaverse. And if somebody wants to travel to or through other dimensions, Earth is without question the most valuable, the easiest base camp to start from. And so people want it. And so North America is also dominated by what's called the Federation of Magic, which is this enormous magical kingdom that's kind of in the mountain section. They've got maps and things that show where everything is. Earth, there's the continent of Atlantis in the Atlantic Ocean, raised up, and that is dominated by the Splugorth. That's the same picture that used to be on the cover back in the old edition of the game. There's all these different magical societies around, and there's, like I said, a ton of world books that will tell you what everything is. Let me show you some more pictures. Because one of the reasons this book is so great, there are two color sections in it that are just full color art, and it's gorgeous. So this is the very famous Red Borg, there's a cyborg class that you can play. There's various other things. These things are called juicers. There's some more dead boys. This is called a glitter boy, which sounds ridiculous and kind of is, but it is a essentially a single person suit of power armor that is kind of like the paladin of the universe. They've got this enormous, just ridiculously powerful gun. They've got reflective armor that reduces incoming laser damage, and that's why it's called the Glitter Boy. There's a lot of things that are silly that I still unabashedly love about this universe. So here you can see kind of the way that it combines magic and technology. This is the cover of one of the supplements called Mindworks, in which this kind of cybernetic scientist is doing experiments on actual gargoyles and adding cybernetic and bionic components to mystical creatures to build an army. There's psychics in it, there's mutant animals in it, there's magic users. Here's some of that Kingdom Federation of Magic stuff. There's one of the main magic classes is called a shifter, whose entire job is to open those dimensional doorways, called rifts, hence the name of the setting, and summon new things. And so here you can see there's a picture of a shifter summoning or communicating with a massive elder god monster from another dimension. And one of the things that I love about this setting is that it deals with summoning magic in a very different way. You play something like D&D or Pathfinder, and often it feels like the summoning magic is just, you know, you've got a magazine for your gun that's full of dire badgers, and every time you need a dire badger, you just pull the trigger and out one pops and it fights and then it goes away. Rift's magic does not do that. When you want to summon something, it takes time, and it is difficult, and it is not a pleasant process, and there are a lot of things that can go wrong, but the power that you gain from it can be immense. And so someone like this, a shifter, can make a pact with one of these greater supernatural beings and say, hey, I have, summoned you, I have communicated with you through the multiverse. If you grant me some power, then I can do stuff for you on Earth. And you just have to hope that the being you have contacted is not going to ask you to do anything horrible that you don't want to do. Which, it's a horror game in many ways, and so that's going to happen. So, lots of different cool art, and I just love it all. This is kind of the main wizard class of the game, which is called a leyline walker. The world is completely crisscrossed with ley lines, and the leyline walker is the most basic spellcaster that the game system has. Here is, in fact, a picture that has some of the major ley lines and their nexus points visible from space. There's some people looking at one of these giant ley lines, and you see there's a little ley line walker right there. And then there's just a lot of monsters in the wilderness, and there's giant armor, and there's just everything. This setting has, that's kind of its point. There's a dragon. There's a big city that's, I can't remember the name of this spire. Storm Spire or something like that. It's a techno-wizard place. Anyway, anything you can imagine exists in this setting at some level. There are 30 different player classes just in the core book alone. And those cover this wide variety of stuff. It starts with some of the very basic combat classes, like a combat Borg, which is that full conversion cyborg where there's very little left of you except maybe your nervous system, and everything else is robotic. In this version of the game, they've streamlined the cyborg classes a little bit. And so there's one called the Headhunter that is a partial conversion cyborg that has some other cool stuff involved with it. There is something called a Juicer, which wears this chemical rig and just kind of pumps them full of drugs and chemicals whenever they need to fight. They are, without question, like the fastest combat class. They have the fastest reflexes. They can do the most damage. They can kind of move better than anybody else. They're these unstoppable chemical ninja things. But with this cool backstory that the chemicals will ravage their body and they'll eventually die in about 5 years. They live a very short life. And of course, they're also reliant on those chemicals that keep the kind of juicer rig, the harness, working. There's a similar human augmentation class called a Crazy, in which they gain powers instead of through a chemical enhancement. It's through these cybernetics that are kind of plugged into your brain, and they give you some, enhanced reflexes and strength and things like that. They also give you psychic powers, and they also kind of drive you mad. And so I love that class because it's such a great example of how, again, they are combining magic ideas with technology and different things like that. Some of the other classes that you get to later, once you get into the magic stuff, there is a mystic, which has both magic and psychic powers. And then there's one called the Techno Wizard, which is just what it sounds like. Someone who casts magic spells like a wizard, but does so through the creation of items. So kind of like an artificer class, that they're able to basically modify a laser pistol so that instead of shooting lasers and running off of batteries, it shoots lightning bolts and it runs off of magic crystals and that potential psychic energy that everybody has. This book does a really good job with the Techno Wizard and makes it a lot more concrete and a lot more playable than it ever used to be in previous iterations of the game. And so if you want to be a Techno Wizard, there's some wonderful rules of how to build your devices and how to use the devices and things like that. Then, of course, there are some of the more bizarre character classes. I showed you the kind of mutant dogs. Those are called Dog Boys, and you can play those either as part of the Coalition states or as Dog Boys that have escaped. And there's this wonderful section where, this huge table of what kind of a dog do you want to be and how is it modified. Similar to the Dog Boys, there's something called a Psy Stalker, which is a kind of semi-human species that looks human, but instead of consuming food, they consume psychic energy. And they've got a couple of basic powers that make them really good trackers and especially really good at combating the supernatural. And so they exist in the wild, and the Coalition uses them as one of the very few non-humans that they will consent to deal with to go out and hunt down these awful supernatural monsters. There's a whole section of character classes that aren't based on magic and they aren't based on combat. If you want to play just a doctor or a scientist, if you want to play an archaeologist who is running around in this crazy world trying to find relics of the pre-Rifts past, or trying to find ancient secrets, then you can totally do that. There's a wilderness scout that's basically just like a ranger. There's, one of the most famous character classes in this game is called the Vagabond, who has nothing. You are basically a drifter. You are not good at combat. You don't have magic. You probably don't have psychic powers, although almost anybody can if you want them. And you're just there. There's no attempt made at game balance in this game, which is one of the reasons a lot of people don't like it. You can be the Vagabond who starts with nothing. I think his starting equipment list includes one gun and a bag of candy. Or you can be an actual dragon hatchling who doesn't need armor. They're incredibly durable. They can knock a guy's head off with one blow. They can breathe fire. They can transform into almost anything just innately. The power differential is crazy, but like I said, if you've got a group of players that are fascinated by this premise and a GM who is willing to tell a story instead of just letting the power levels run wild, you can do amazing things. So let's talk a little bit about the world itself. Now I showed you my entire, shelf full of world books, and that goes into a lot of detail. There's one about the American Southwest. There's one about Mexico, which, northern Mexico and the American Southwest together are kind of overrun by vampires. Which makes a lot of sense, because I used to live in northern Mexico, and it is pure desert and virtually never rains, and so if running water can kill you, that's a great place to live. Um, there's a couple of really wonderful books that detail Europe and this very large human civilization called Triax that exists in Germany. And there's some other areas in Poland. There are 2 books that detail what Russia is like in Rift's Earth. There's one for Japan. There are 2 or 3 for China. There's Australia. There are, a couple of different books for South America. And I think 2 or 3 books, I want to say 3 books, just detailing Atlantis, which is totally made up. And Rift's Atlantis is probably the very best of all the Rifts books. It's got just so many incredible ideas packed into it. It's just wonderful. One of the great things about this Rifts Ultimate Edition, and let's go back to the PDF and show you, is that they have this big long section starting right here. Erin Tarn, she's like an anthropologist, a wanderer. She explores Rift's Earth and she writes things about it, and she's just kind of the narrative voice that the books often use in order to explain what the world is like. And so she's got this section here where she talks about the time before the rifts and then how the rifts showed up, and then it just goes down to this world overview thing here. And I love the world overview because it gives you quick little bits about everything. Okay? So if you want to buy the England book, you can buy the England book. And then you have a bunch of, new magic classes and a bunch of new items and all these wonderful descriptions of how these people live in giant trees and stuff like that. Or if you don't have that, you just read these couple of paragraphs and they give you a quick overview of it. They've got similar things for Poland and Russia, New German Republic, which is Triax, and it just goes on and on for pages and pages and pages of different stuff all over. And so this is one of the reasons that I love this particular edition of the game, is because it has all of this world information in brief packed into it. But with, of course, you can see how big the book is. There's a lot of really usable detail. So if you want to travel outside of North America, we've got the overview here. But if you want to stick to North America, which is where most of the stuff happens, most of this story is set, it goes into exhaustive detail on how that all works and what things are like and all of that. So let's see if I can show you. Yeah, so it's got a whole big section here of robot vehicles. There's the rules section. I wanted to show you one of the little kind of game catalog portions. Oh no, that's still just world information, or I mean rule information. What's this? Oh, that's the tail end of it. Final thoughts. So, it also has all of this stuff. Like here, you can learn about the other things. Anyway, you get the point. Rift's Earth is a really fascinating setting. There are so many different cities. There's 2 books that are entirely just based around 2 books that are about this size, about core book size, that are just focused on one town called Merktown, which makes a really good base camp if you want to start a story there. There's several books that are about northern Mexico, southwest U.S., that detail a city called Arsno, and you get a really good look at El Paso and Ciudad Juarez, so that you can, if you want to set a campaign there, you can. If you want to travel around the world, you can do that. I have never encountered a more thoroughly explored and a more diverse role-playing setting ever. No one has gone into this kind of exhaustive, rich, imaginative detail of a single planet that spans, 70 or 80 books just describing what it's like. And then, of course, they go off planet. There's 7 or so books that describe a Rift's space fantasy setting called Phase World. Phase World is similar to Earth in that it is a nexus of dimensional portals, but it's instead of being self-contained and then it's off in outer space. There's a couple of different dimension books like that. There's just so much variety in Rifts, and I could gush about it for another couple of hours. I could talk about it exhaustively. I am going to link underneath this video to the RPG Geek article that I wrote that kind of talks about the setting and gives a thorough review of this and some other things. And if you have other questions about it, I will evangelize the Rift's setting forever. So anyway, thank you for watching this. I do intend at some point in the future to get pretty heavily into Savage Rifts and talk more about that. Okay? Because I've got these core 3 Savage Rifts books that were in the Kickstarter a year or 2 ago. They've put out some more since, and they've done updates for the new version of Savage World. There's a lot to talk about there. But for now, Rifts Ultimate Edition, the best RPG to steal ideas from. It really is just a wonderful, rich setting that has so much possibility and can tell any type of story you want to tell. And yes, the game system is old and the game system is less than stellar, but you know what? It's what made me a gamer in the first place. So I will always love it for that reason. Anyway, thank you very much for watching this. I hope that I have been able to impart some measure of my own personal enthusiasm and love for the Rift setting. And I will see you on my next review. Bye.